You're listening to Kizuki, the podcast. I'm Mae Yoshikawa, and I define the Japanese concept of Kizuki as the following. Kizuki. 1. A moment of epiphany, an aha of realization or insight which opens the knower to a new dimension of truth that was formerly unknown. 2. Steps in an incremental growth of awareness, resulting in a movement from ignorance to greater awareness of the bigger picture. A kind of knowing that cannot be undone, that cannot be unrealized. As a longtime yoga and meditation practitioner, a world traveler, and curious self-explorer, I'm obsessed with Kizukis. Listen on each week for inspiring and enlightening stories that may just tip you over for your next aha. On this week's episode, we welcome our first ever guest to hear from him about one of the Kizukis that has been most transformative in his life. It's called The Neuroscience of Growth with Jesse McCrindle. All right, everyone. Today we have my first guest. It's Jesse J. McCrindle. Welcome, Jesse.
Thank you.
So let's let the listeners know who you are and who you are to me, actually, everyone. Jesse is my nephew, my actual nephew, my eldest sister's son. And you are what now, 25 years old?
25 years old.
And gosh, aside from me babysitting him as what, a 19-year-old, I think. Obviously we've been family and we've known each other, but more importantly, recently we've really reconnected in some unexpected ways. And we've discovered that we have a lot in common. Jesse has been studying positive psychology,
Neuroscience, but all the topics I've been interested in are in that space of positive psychology, self-flourishment, that kind of space.
Yes, and of course, as you know, me having been in this wellness space and particularly working with the mind, and this concept of Kizuki that I'm so passionate about bringing to a global audience. And through my podcast, actually, we've really reconnected. So I am happy to welcome him as my first guest. Jesse, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Also, I do want to clarify that you were 19 when I was being babysat, not me. But yeah, I'm...
Not you.
Not me. I wasn't 19.
You weren't 19, no.
You were 19. I was a baby.
You were too hairy by then.
I'm half English, half Japanese. I grew up in Tokyo, and then I moved to Amsterdam when I was 18 to do my studies, which was in that neuroscience space. And then when I was 23, I moved to Sydney. But yeah, as May said, I'm very interested in that whole, positive psychology and trying to intertwine as much biology or neuroscience into it and really get like a whole understanding of the brain. And I guess the big question that centers or that drives my interests in that space are around how to live like a great life. And so spirituality and that mind space where you come from fits in really nicely with that. So I think a big part of the reconnecting thing has been from, we both have very similar interests, but then have come at it from like slightly different angles whilst really interested in the other person's angle as well.
Yeah, and obviously for both of us and for each of us, we have had life experiences that have nudged us forward to our interests. So what were some of the things that happened in your life, and when did you start taking interest in these matters of positive psychology and how to live a good life and how to be happy?
This is very topical at the moment because I was speaking to my cousin and he's 18 now, and he's trying to decide what university and that whole thing. And I remember probably when I was around 15, 16 was, I think, when I first started to think more deeply about my interests and values and what I want to do. And I think that's pretty typical, right? Because you're going to university, you have to decide something for your life for once. So that would have been the first time where I had to really think about what am I interested in, and I had no idea. So I started asking a lot of people around me that were my mom's friends, how did you find out, what you're interested in? How did you, get into this job you have now? And I was trying to get like a roadmap from other people on how they did their life and see if I could kind of copy it. And I guess that was the first time I started thinking about it. And also at that age, I had my mom's second divorce and a knee surgery, and I love sports, so that was a big hit on my mental health. So maybe that period of sort of deepening my psyche, conscious depth of experience was formative. And then maybe the next sort of big thing was, moving abroad and having such a great time and realizing how important social connections are, that kind of thing. And then getting stuck into my studies. I don't know. I think for me, a lot of my learnings came from family related challenges and traveling and living in different places and meeting different people, and my studies. That would be like the three main things, I think.
I remember you mentioned to me before about your knee surgery, and of course, kind of being in the greater family, I knew of it. But what was it about your personal experience of it that you found most challenging, that pushed you to change?
Probably being stuck in the hospital for a couple of weeks and you can't move, and your knee feels like not like it used to, and there's something there kind of like hooking at your ligament, which was the surgery I had. And that feels bizarre because your body feels like it's changed in how it works. And that was especially sad for me because I played a lot of sports, and football being the main one, which is how I hurt myself. And leading up to the surgery, I had many ambulance trips, and I had 5 in 1 year.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. From sports injuries?
From the same thing. It was a torn ligament, and I didn't operate, so I had my knee would lock, and then we didn't know what was going on. So we would just go to the ambulance or go to the hospital. So I had a lot of those, and then eventually it was like, all right, we have to get operated. And just being out of sports for a while, but in like a pretty, I don't want to say traumatic, but in a pretty traumatic way. Every time I tried to play sports for a year, I was really worried about my knee.
Right.
Because I kept getting hurt. And then I had surgery, and then after that, I still had that fear of injuring myself for like a year or two really acutely, and I just stopped playing football, which was my favorite sport. And I remember after the surgery, after a couple months, I went back to try again, and I was just so bad, and I couldn't handle that either. So I had like this big break, and I felt like, I was just going to be like kind of like in fear about my knee when I was doing anything sports wise. So that was like a big thought, I think, for me at the time. And then, being stuck in the hospital, like now I make it a practice to like exercise, every day if I can, because it's so impactful for my mental health. And then so looking back, like 2 weeks, no exercise is like so crazy. And I think I didn't have Wi-Fi. So I was just kind of like wallowing, as a 16-year-old.
Wow. So this fear, so not just the injury itself, but going in and out of the hospital, of course, and having this fear, Were you conscious of it at the time, or was it in hindsight that you recognized, oh, wow, I really let that fear, impact the way I was experiencing sports?
I was definitely not aware that a lot of my problems at the time, being the fear, came from the fear of the future as opposed to what it was then and there. I didn't know that at the time. So that's definitely in hindsight. I know that I was having that future fear dominate a lot of my current situation. But that said, I don't know, the knee surgery was one thing, but it's more the fact that it collided with like a divorce. And when you're 16, 17 in the British school system, you do, it's like the step up into the last 2 years of high school. And it's really hard. And I was really struggling to like motivate myself, all of that. So it was kind of like the collision made it hard.
And what kind of a person did that experience make you into?
I suppose at the time, I think I thought I was just happy to get over that experience. I would say like it started at 16 with the operation, but then following that it's so funny to like think back on it, because following that I had a period of sports, which was like a big source of my happiness and mental health, was totally changed. My experience of it was totally changed. I switched sports, but I still had that fear and I felt weak, all of that. And then I had the divorce, and then the like last 2 really hard years of high school. So I would say it went from like 16 to 18 was a very transformative period. And I was also trying to figure out, what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I thought I had to know then. But I would say, my conscious awareness at the time was when I graduated, I was just crying and I was like, thank God that's over. And I could just like go abroad and, new chapter. I don't think I had much awareness of like what I was building in myself at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of amazed to hear about these stories and have an insider's look about it, because obviously, I remember when you had your knee surgery, and I remember you being in high school and then you deciding to go to school in Amsterdam and stuff. I didn't know until you told me later that those were some of the most challenging years of your life. And then I remember asking you, hey, Jess, what are you studying? And you said something along the lines of, well, I just want to know what makes people happy, like what makes people tick, And, because I've known you since you were born. It's like, oh, cool. He's, studying happiness and studying neuroscience. And I always thought it was cool because it was kind of up my alley too. But I didn't know how serious you were and how impactful it is on your life. But now, with regard to your mother and to her family too, I think there's ripple effects to the decisions that you've made in your life. Not only because of the academic route that you've chosen, but also because it's so applicable to your like mental health. It's the way that you carry yourself in your own day-to-day life. And now I see it having positive ripples like on your mom and on your cousins and my kids. And it's a beautiful thing to witness. It's actually scary to see how much impact you have on my kids, for example, and how much they look up to you. They look up to you by default, but we'll let them figure that out. So I want to ask you, I know that you've listened to at least a couple of episodes of Kizuki the podcast, and of course you having somewhat of a background in the Japanese language and culturally having grown up in Tokyo, but I wouldn't say that Japanese is your forte, right?
Definitely not.
But did you know this word Kizuki?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay. And what did you know about it?
I knew it in the context of like kizuita, like I noticed something
Yeah,
rather
something small.
than insight, which is how I see it now.
Yeah, well, of course, it can be as something small as
That's true.
noticing a freckle that wasn't there before, ranging from the entire spectrum to being like a life-changing epiphany, seeing something that you were formerly unaware of, that once realized, you can't unsee it. You can't unrealize it, right? And I know that in my life, as I look back, it was some of these biggest challenges and the hardships and the struggles that pushed me to these breakthroughs, these ahas. It pushed me to change my own perspective, to see the same thing, but in a different way, and therefore to move beyond it. So I want to ask you, I'm sure there's been many, like we all have many.
Yeah.
It's like we collect them as we learn and evolve as a human being. But I want to ask you, what's one of the biggest Kizuki moments of your life? Like what led up to it and what did you realize?
Yeah, I actually just I just remembered a really big one I had in this conversation when I was explaining that period of my life. And it was, I mean, this is probably actually the biggest Kizuki I've had. But yeah, I think when I was in the hospital and when I was 16 or, yeah, 16, I realized how your perception and psychology affects, well, actually just determines the quality of your life. And I realized that because um, in this period, I wasn't disabled, like not really. And I thought about this Japanese high school teacher, and I think there is like some show or like a movie about him. I don't even know if he's a real character, but he's got no arms, no legs. Do you know this guy?
Yes, yes.
And he's really happy. And I think, yeah, so I think when I was that age, I just thought like, oh wow, so you could have no arms, no legs, and still be happy. So it's not the arms and legs that make you happy. It's the way you think and perceive things. And so um and that's very individualistic. And so I think from that period of my life, I became much more like I realized how important the way you think about things is. And I started noticing it more. Like I remember um like a classmate who I had a classmate really, really good academically. And I remember like a friend of mine saying like, oh, I wish I was like him. And I thought like, man, that's such an unhelpful thing to think. And that was, around 16. And then I realized that like, yeah, you thinking that definitely has some negative effects for you. And didn't really know why, but I knew that that was important. So I would say, yeah, the first time I realized how important the way you think is to how happy you are, that must have been like one of the most important Kizuki in my life.
That's so powerful. That reminds me of the Byron Katie quote. I'm sure we've spoken about her before. A phenomenal teacher and author, just such a grounded, loving soul. There's a quote by her where she says, and I'm paraphrasing, but that the issue is never outside of you. You know, whether you think you have money troubles or you have human relationship troubles or you want something to go differently at work or whatever, the issue is never the outside thing. It's always what you think about the outside thing, and that you can't change your outside circumstance, but you can always change what you think about it. And I love that topic because in a sense it's elusive because it's unseen. Unless you're sitting down and picking up a pen, as we both do in journaling, and you're bringing concrete words, ink, to your thoughts and writing them out or drawing them out or however you express yourself, these things remain in the dimension of the mental plane. some things are verbalized and others aren't even put in words, but the idea is there. And then gradually it might take a thought form, and then you might have like a thought that concretizes into a concept, and then it can become a belief. Where, for in the example of your friend in high school, he or she or they may have thought, I am not as good as him.
Yeah, exactly.
And that becomes a belief. Then, as you said, paints the lens of your own eyes. So if it's, painted slightly gray, like I am not good enough, then the entire world begins to look gray. But it's never actually that the world is gray. It's that your idea of it has been painted, or in this case, tainted, by the coloring of your belief.
Well, it's so interesting because with like things we know from neuroscience, you can demonstrate how powerful that painting effect is. And I have two examples that come to mind, but one is in that latter stage where that thought, just before that thought transcends into belief, like just confirmation bias, that idea that like, the fact that once you start to think something, your brain will start to look for evidence to support that. And
I always think that works like Google. Like once you start researching something and whatever you punch in, makes you prone to finding all the links that confirm you.
Yeah, leading questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Am I smarter than they? Like that kind of thing. And the other neuroscience thing is at like a preceding stage of awareness, I guess, which is unconscious priming, right? Like when the brain has identified something to be important and it goes into your unconscious awareness, it's that same, it's similar to confirmation bias, but you start seeing that thing everywhere. And it's like this example we use, the company I work in, is when you buy, when you are about to buy a car and you do a lot of research for, the model you want, and it's a Ford something. And then the next day you buy the car and then you look around and you see a lot of the Ford something everywhere. And it's not like that car has, actually become more popular. It's just that your unconscious has primed you to notice it everywhere. So it's similar to the confirmation bias, but like it's so powerful how what you think affects your reality. And it could be how you think, things you believe and how that affects your behavior, but even like your immune system, right? Like there's the whole field of psychoneuroimmunology, and they show that like the things you think about or how you feel would affect your immune system. And that's very real. And it's not like a wishy-washy,
Sure. And that also, for me, being a parent to children, that also makes me think about the kinds of words and language that I use to my kids that reinforces that, not only in their psyche, but also, like you said, in their immune system, in the way that they live and breathe.
Yeah.
Because, and I know this for a fact, well, obviously because I've done a lot of unwinding my own unconscious or formerly unconscious beliefs in my time through meditation and journaling and all of these practices, but also because now I work with hundreds of students in my community as I guide them through these journaling prompts and these meditation sessions, because these memories start to come up like, oh, well, when did I start thinking that I am not enough? Well, of course, because my mom used to tell me since I was 2 years old to get my shit together, or my dad used to tell me this, or someone treated me this way. And so not to put all the blame on them, but there's usually a trigger or something that instigates someone to have that initial idea, oh, maybe I'm not good enough. And then, like you said, it gets primed. And then it gets confirmed through the bias, and you end up unconsciously reinforcing it until you become conscious of it. Yeah. And then you can begin the path and the practice of undoing it for yourself. But I'm curious to know because, relatively speaking, a pretty young age, right? Like 16, where you noticed, this perception in psychology, the way someone looks at life is coloring their experience of it. And then at the same time, you witness your friend, who has this underlying belief, oh, I am less than my other friend who's very academically talented. And you are in this witnessing observer standpoint where, that thought is not helping him or her. Now, how this Kizuki, right? This Kizuki that, wow, perception in psychology is really important to happiness. Now, I'm sure maybe part of it was instant and then some of it or a lot of it was incremental. But how have you since been applying that Kizuki in your life?
I think that was like the launch pad, and then I started seeing it everywhere. Let me think of an instance. I guess another instance of where, recognizing that your psychology is more impactful than, legs and arms to your happiness for some people, is, I'm trying to think if this is a good example. Well, perhaps a good example is growth mindset. That kind of underpins a lot of my like willingness to learn things in general, and that's all set in the way you think about your ability to learn or your intelligence. And this kind of ties back to what you said about what words you use for your kids, because that can totally nudge them into like a fixed or growth mindset, right? Something that so many parents or teachers wouldn't even think about this, right? But if you praise your child for an outcome, like, wow, that drawing is really good, they begin to attach their happiness or that praise to the outcome. The drawing was good, and therefore if the drawing's not good, they're not going to get that praise, right? And that can nudge them towards a fixed mindset of like, okay, it turns out I'm pretty good at drawing, so I should probably do this. I get praised for it because I'm good at it, and it kind of discourages doing other things that you might not be good at. Whereas like that same praise of like, oh, I instead of praising the outcome, you start to praise the effort that went into it, or the thoughtfulness, or like the perseverance, or whatever else that's process oriented instead of outcome oriented, would nudge your kid into a growth mindset. And so I think after learning that, having the belief that intelligence isn't fixed was really helpful. And I think that's the kind of the thing that triggered me about my friend making like that offhanded comment. I think that was like an indication that you're rooting yourself in that fixed mindset. Oh, he's just smarter, so it's easier, and it's not empowering. And I think, I was struggling in school at the time as well, but I knew, maybe it was a big ego as well. Like I knew I would be able to learn it if someone else could learn it. So applying that growth mindset of like, how can I, through the face of like sucking at it, shift the way I think about it so that I could change how I felt about sucking at something, Mm-hmm. So I would say, and that one is such a big one, because growth mindset is not something you have or you don't, and it differs between stages of your life, or moods you're in, or things you're talking about. Like you could be a relatively growth mindseted person, but then maths is like a topic that you're fixed mindseted about. Or when you're stressed, you drop into a fixed mindset, and that makes sense. So that's like a ongoing psychological thing that I work on all the time, so that I continue to have like a positive, motivation state towards like challenges in my life. Like that underlying belief that like I can grow through this and not not like, oh, I'm not capable now, therefore I won't be. That's just not true. And then not helpful to believe, even if it was true.
Yeah, to me, ultimately coming from a not scientific background, coming from like yoga and meditation and just the observation of mind and thought patterns, to me, when I boil into like, what is the essence of that? The switch from having this fixed mindset to thinking or beginning to think, or even being willing to begin to think that maybe I can grow through this instead of I can't, or Dickie Knight, I can't, or I'm not enough, or I'm not good enough, or all of these other negative ideas. The essence of that to me is openness and trust.
Yeah, trust is a big one.
Yeah, because the openness is just, who knows? It could happen. It's good enough to be open rather than closed, or open rather than fixed, right? But the trust element, oh my God, I have like for years toiled away at this in my own life, because some of those beliefs, they are sticky. They're in there. And like you said, oh, you might be acing it at school, but you might suck with money. Or you might be, killing it in soccer, but you just can't get a girlfriend. Or whatever it is for you, I feel like we all have our smooth areas and less than kind of like stickier sort of areas. And I think that's where we're most challenged to, I'm not even sure how to put this. Some people say you must earn your trust. Like in human relationship, that someone has to work towards it before you can trust them. Personally, I've never completely vibed with that. I like to think that I'm a little bit more generous with the willingness to lean into trust.
That's a sign of resilience.
Is it really?
Like when you believe people are inherently good and you're trusting. Yeah, I'm the same as well. Yeah.
Really? But I wonder, for someone who is fear-based and kind of shrinking into this more fixed mindset, what can be an initial spark that, I don't know, maybe that's part of a bigger conversation about whether it's even possible to spark that change in someone. And I know, I think about this all of the time because of the Kizuki journaling method that I created. We make a space for a safe space, for a willingness to look at yourself. But the walking the talk bit, the willingness to Kizuku, to come to greater awareness, to learn, to be open, that must be chosen, and that must be done by the person himself, herself. You can't, someone can't do that for you.
Yeah. Well, the trust is such a big one, because when you're coming from a fear-based thing, it's so hard to be trusting and open. And it's having a growth mindset is like a necessity in a lot of settings, like a high-performing team, or whenever you're trying to do anything that's hard. But it's also like a luxury if you look at it from the brain perspective, in that when you're stressed or when you're coming from like a fear-based thing, you don't have the resources to adopt that growth mindset. Not like strictly, but it just becomes harder because it's more tiring to take on a growth mindset approach. It's much easier to give up. So having that trust, and it's also that thing of like, at the end of the day, being open and willing to experiment, which is a growth mindset trait, requires trust. And also that trust that even if it doesn't go well, it'll be fine. Not trust that it will go well. And that means you also have to have that psychological like battery of like, if it doesn't go well, I'll be okay. And if you're, someone who doesn't have that resilience, or you don't have that space within you to like, I couldn't possibly handle another defeat or rejection or whatever, then it will be harder for you. And
that used to be me. That so used to be me. And I actually don't have that anymore.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so ironic because that's when you should employ that
It's so
mindset the
true.
most. Yeah.
It's so true. I really, really love what you said there. And I just want to highlight that as we come to a close in our conversation. You said, even if it doesn't go perfectly, even if it doesn't go well, that it'll be okay.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because like coming from science or neuroscience, where data is everything and, you need evidence and, or even me, like as a teacher, and I can teach all of these different methods and these like, steps and actionable steps and all of these things to try and help someone. But if we really, really boil down to the essence of something as important as trust or self-trust or trust in life, and we say, it's just knowing that even if it doesn't go well, it'll be all right.
Yeah.
It just sounds so bland, right?
Yeah.
I think for a lot of like intellectuals and a lot of people who are looking for answers in life, it sounds like, really?
It's intangible.
It's like I'm just supposed to, put my faith or put myself into something that indefinite, But I have come to, personally, love the exploration of that. I know for a fact that I've like, struggled and had sleepless nights and wanted to pull all my hair out over something like that. But I've also come to appreciate the elegance of a universe and of a life that we can't necessarily define.
Yeah. And it's so funny because as you say this, and being aware that I'm being recorded, I think like, has it been hard enough that I could say that, just have trust, everything will be fine, even if it isn't? Like, I'm conscious people think, well, he or she hasn't been through what I've been through. But then hearing you say it, and I know what you've been through. So it's like, and I think about that teacher with no arms, no legs. Like it just means it's harder, but it doesn't mean you can't think that way and have that trust and, trust that it is going to be okay. And it's so ironic because when you don't have that trust, it's harder for it to be okay. And you have to have that belief that like it will be okay, and then that's when it becomes okay, you know? And it's like, it's a tricky one.
And like you said, for someone who, coming from someone who hasn't had an easy life, for me, that's actually why I can say that these Kizukis are applicable not just to people who've had the hard lives. And it's not that you have to earn that Kizuki. It's not that you have to have the hardship to finally come to this realization and therefore you can be saved. It's not that.
It's just a blessing.
It's just available to us all. And it's not even more painful or less painful or harder or less hard. It's just my life.
Yeah.
And it's just your life. But welcome, right? When you decide to show up for it and stop comparing it with other people, or just to be present enough to appreciate it with a purity, with an innocence that doesn't have to be filtered through these negative biases and through these beliefs. Welcome, because now you are just meeting life as it is.
Yeah.
Gosh, well, thanks for joining me today.
No worries.
And I would love to have you back for another episode, so let's do another one.
Yeah, totally. No, this is so much fun.
Okay, beautiful soul. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Learn more about me and my Kizuki journaling Mae method at my website, journaling.mae-y.com/en, or find me on Instagram at MaeYoshikawa.